Okay, how's it going, everybody? So we're going to read some more of the German ideology today by Karl Marx. This was written in 1845. This is the second chapter, the Leipzig Council of St. Bruno. So we read section 1 of the second chapter, the Leipzig Council. Now we're going to read the second section of the second chapter, or the second section of the second chapter of volume 1, which is St. Bruno. And the subsection out of this second section is quote unquote campaign against Feuerbach. Let's go ahead and get into this. Okay, so it says, before turning to the solemn discussion which Bauer's self-consciousness has with itself and the world, we should reveal one secret. St. Bruno uttered the battle cry and kindled the war only because he had to quote-unquote safeguard himself and his stale, soured criticism against the ungrateful forgetfulness of the public. Only because he had to show that, in the changed conditions of 1845, criticism always remained itself and unchanged. He wrote the second volume of the, quote, good cause and his own cause, end quote. So it has something in brackets here. It means this is not Marx. It says, Bruno Bauer's article, quote, characteristic Ludwig Feuerbachs, end quote, is here ironically called the second volume of Bauer's book, Die gute Sache der Freiheit und meine eigene Angelegenheit, the good cause of freedom and my own cause. So this is back to Marx. That was maybe who somebody just gave some context, I guess. This is, that wasn't, Marx didn't even cite anything there. But anyway, back to Marx. He says, he stands his ground, he fights pro aris ec focis, which means for altars and hearths. It's used in the sense of for house and home. That is, pleading his own cause. In the true theological manner, however, he conceals this aim of his by an appearance of wishing to, quote-unquote, characterize Feuerbach. Poor Bruno was quite forgotten, as was best proved by the polemic between Feuerbach and Stirner, which no notice at all was taken of him. For just this reason, he seized on this polemic in order to be able to proclaim himself as the antithesis of the antagonists, their higher unity, the Holy Spirit. St. Bruno opens his campaign with a burst of artillery fire against Feuerbach, that is to say, with a revised and enlarged reprint of an article which had already appeared in Norddeutsche Blätter. Feuerbach is made into a knight of quote-unquote substance, in order that Bauer's self-consciousness shall stand out in stronger relief. And this transubstantiation of Feuerbach, which is supposed to be proved by all the writings of the latter, our holy man jumps at once from Feuerbach's writings on Leibniz and Bile to the Wesen des Christentums, leaving out the article against the, quote, positive philosophers, end quote, in the Hallische Jahrbucher. This oversight is in place, for there Feuerbach revealed the whole wisdom of self-consciousness as against the positive representatives of substance, at a time when St. Bruno was still indulging in speculation on the Immaculate Conception. It is hardly necessary to mention that St. Bruno still continues to prance about on his old Hegelian warhorse. Listen to the first passage in this latest revelations from the Kingdom of God. Quote, Hegel combined into one Spinoza's substance and Fichte's ego, the unity of both, the combination of these opposing spheres, etc., constitutes the peculiar interest, but at the same time, the weakness of Hegel's philosophy. This contradiction in which Hegel's system was entangled had to be resolved and destroyed. But he could only do this by making it impossible for all time to put the question, what is the relation of self-consciousness to the absolute spirit? This was possible in two ways. Either self-consciousness had to be burned again in the flames of substance, i.e., the pure substantiality relation had to be firmly established and maintained, or it had to be shown that personality is the creator of its own attributes and essence, that it belongs to the concept of personality in general to posit itself, the concept or the personality, is limited and again to abolish this limitation which it posits by its universal essence. For precisely this essence is only the result of its inner self-distinction of its activity. It says Vigan, page 86, 87, and 88. This is back to Marx. In Die Heilige Familie, Hegelian philosophy was represented as a union of Spinoza and Fichte, and at the same time, the contradiction involved in this was emphasized. The specific peculiarity of Saint Bruno is that, unlike the authors of Die Heilige Familie, he does not regard the question of the relation of self-consciousness to substance as a, quote, a point of controversy within Hegelian speculation, end quote, but as a world historic, even an absolute question. This is the sole form in which he is capable of expressing the conflicts of the present day. He really believes that the triumph of self-consciousness over substance has a most essential influence not only on European equilibrium, but also on the whole future development of the organ problem. As to the extent to which the abolition of the Corn Laws in England depends on it, very little has so far transpired. The abstract and nebulous expression into which a real collision is distorted by Hegel is held by this, quote, critical mind to be the real collision itself. Bruno accepts the speculative contradiction and upholds one part of it against the other. A philosophical phrase about a real question is for him the real question itself. Consequently, on the one hand, instead of real people and their real consciousness of their social relations, which apparently confront them as something independent, he has the mere abstract expression, self-consciousness, just as instead of real production, he has the activity of the self-consciousness, which has become independent. On the other hand, instead of real nature and the actually existing social relations, he has the philosophical summing up of all the philosophical categories or names of these relations in the expression substance. For Bruno, along with all philosophers and ideologists, erroneously regards thoughts and ideas, the independent intellectual expression of the existing world, as the basis of this existing world. It is obvious that with these two abstractions, which have become senseless and empty, he can perform all kinds of tricks without knowing anything at all about real people and their relations. See in addition what is said about substance in connection with Feuerbach and concerning, quote, humane liberalism, end quote, and the, quote, holy in connection with St. Max. Hence, he does not forsake the speculative basis in order to solve the contradictions of speculation. He maneuvers while remaining on that basis, and he himself still stands so much on the specifically Hegelian basis that the relation of, quote, self-consciousness, end quote, to the, quote, absolute spirit, end quote, still gives him no peace. In short, we are confronted with the philosophy of self-consciousness that was announced in Der Synaptiker, carried out in Das Andachte Christentum, and which unfortunately was long ago anticipated in Hegel's Phänomenologie. This new philosophy of Bauer's was completely disposed of in Die Heilige Familie on page 220 and on pages 304-07. Here, however, Saint Bruno even contrives to caricature himself by smuggling in, quote, personality, in order to be able, with Stirner, to portray the single individual as, quote, his own product, end quote, and Stirner as Bruno's product. This step forward deserves a brief notice. First of all, let the reader compare this caricature with the original, the explanation given of self-consciousness in Das Entdeckte Christentum, page 113, or Christentum, page 113, and then let him compare this explanation with its prototype, which Hegel's Phänomenologie, pages 575, 583, and so on. Both these passages are reproduced in Die Heilige Familie, pages 221, 223, 224. But now let us turn to the caricature. Quote, personality in general, concept, universal essence, deposit itself as limited and again to abolish a limitation, inner self-distinction, end quote. What tremendous results, quote unquote, results. Quote, personality in general is either nonsense in general, end quote, is either nonsense in general or the abstract concept of personality. Therefore, it is part of the concept. Of the concept of personality deposit itself as limited. This limitation, which belongs to the concept of its concept, personality directly afterwards posits, quote, by its universal essence, end quote. And after it has again abolished its limitation, It turns out that precisely this essence is the result of its inner distinction. The entire grandiose result of this intricate tautology amounts, therefore, to Hegel's familiar trick of the self-distinction of man in thought, a self-distinction which the unfortunate Bruno stubbornly proclaims to be the sole activity of personality in general. A fairly long time ago, it was pointed out to St. Bruno that there is nothing to be got from a personality whose activity is restricted to these, by now trivial logical leaps. At the same time, the passage quoted contains the naive admission that the essence of Bauer's personality is the concept of a concept, the abstraction of an abstraction. Bruno's criticism of Feuerbach, insofar as it is new, is restricted to hypocritically representing Stirner's reproaches against Feuerbach and Bauer as Bauer's reproaches against Feuerbach. Thus, for example, the assertions that the quote essence of man is essence in general and something holy, end quote, that quote man is the God of man, end quote, that the human species is quote the absolute, end quote, that Feuerbach splits man quote into an essential and inessential ego, end quote. Although Bruno always declares that the abstract is the essential and, in his antithesis of criticism, in the mass conceives the split as far more monstrous than Feuerbach does, that a struggle must be waged against the, quote, predicates of God, end quote, etc. On the question of selfish and selfless love, Bruno, polemizing with Feuerbach, copies Stirner almost word for 3 pages, page 133 to 35, just as he very clumsily copies Stirner's phrases, quote, every man in his own creation, end quote, quote, truth is a ghost, end quote, and so on. In addition, in Bruno, the, quote, creation is transformed into a, quote, product. We shall return to this exploitation of Stirner by St. Bruno. Thus, the first thing that we discovered in St. Bruno was his continual dependence on Hegel. We shall not, of course, dwell further on the remarks he has copied from Hegel, but shall only put together a few more passages which show how firmly he believes in the power of the philosophers, and how he shares their illusion that a modified consciousness, a new turn given to the interpretation of existing relations, could overturn the whole hitherto existing world, imbued with this faith. St. Bruno also has one of his pupils certify, in issue 4 of Weygand's Quarterly, page 327, that his phrases on personality given above, which were proclaimed by him in issue 3, were, quote, world-shattering ideas, end quote. St. Bruno says, Weygand, philosophy has never been anything but theology reduced to its most general form and given its most rational expression, end quote. This passage aimed against Feuerbach is copied almost word for word from Feuerbach's Philosophie de Zukunft. Quote, speculative philosophy is true, consistent rational theology, end quote. Bruno continues, quote, philosophy in alliance with religion has always striven for the absolute dependence of the individual and has actually achieved this by demanding and causing the absorption of the individual life in universal life, of the accident and substance of man in the absolute spirit, end quote. As if Bruno's philosophy in alliance with Hegel's and still continuing, this is back to Marx here, as if Bruno's philosophy in alliance with Hegel's and his still continuing forbidden association with theology did not demand, if not cause, the absorption of man in the idea of one of his accidents, that of self-consciousness as substance. Moreover, one sees from this whole passage with what joy the Church Father, with his pulpit eloquence, continues to proclaim his world-shattering faith in the mysterious power of the holy theologians and philosophers, of course in the interests of the good cause of freedom and his own cause. On page 105, our God-fearing man has the insolence to reproach Feuerbach. Quote, Feuerbach made of the individual, of the depersonalized man of Christianity, not a man, not a true, real personal man. These predicates owe their origins to die Heilige Familie in Stirner, but an emasculated man, a slave, end quote. It's back to Marx. And thereby utters inter alia, the nonsense that he, St. Bruno, can make people by means of the mind. Further on in the same passage he says, quote, according to Feuerbach, the individual has to subordinate himself to the species, serve it. The species of which Feuerbach speaks is Hegel's absolute, and it, too, exists nowhere, end quote. It's back to Marx. Here, as in all the other passages, St. Bruno does not deprive himself of the glory of making the actual relations of individuals dependent on the philosophical interpretation of these relations. He has not the slightest inkling of the correlation which exists between the concepts of Hegel's absolute spirit and Feuerbach's species, on the one hand, and the existing world on the other. On page 104, the Holy Father is mightily shocked by the heresy with which Feuerbach transforms the Holy Trinity of reason, love, and will into something that, quote, is in individuals and over individuals, end quote. As though in our day, every inclination, every impulse, every need did not assert itself as a force in the individual and over the individual. Whenever circumstances hinder their satisfaction, if the Holy Father Bruno experiences hunger, for example, without the means of appeasing it, then even his stomach will become a force in him and over him. Feuerbach's mistake is not that he stated this fact, but that in idealistic fashion he endowed it with independence instead of regarding it as the product of a definite and surmountable stage of historical development. See, so this is back. You see, this is page 101. I guess this is back to Saint Bruno. Quote, Feuerbach is a slave, and his servile nature does not allow him to fulfill the work of a man, to recognize the essence of religion. He does not perceive the essence of religion because he does not know the bridge over which he can make his way to the source of religion, end quote. St. Bruno still seriously believes that religion has its own essence. As for the bridge over which one makes one's way to the source of religion, this assessed bridge must certainly be an aqueduct. At the same time, St. Bruno establishes himself as a curiously modernized Charon who has been retired owing to the building of the bridge, becoming a toll keeper who demands a halfpenny from every person crossing the bridge to the spectral realm of religion. On page 120, the saint remarks, quote, how could Feuerbach exist if there were no truth, and truth were only a specter, of which hitherto man has been afraid, end quote. The, quote, man who fears the, quote, specter of, quote, truth is no other than the worthy Bruno himself. 10 pages earlier, on page 110, he had already let out the following world-shattering cry of terror at the sight of the specter of truth. Quote, truth, which is never itself encountered as a ready-made object which develops itself and reaches unity only in the unfolding of the personality, end quote. Thus, we have here not only truth, the specter, transformed into a person which develops itself and reaches unity, but in addition, this trick is accomplished in a third personality outside it, after the manner of the tapeworm. Concerning the holy man's former love affair with truth, when he was still young and the lust of the flesh was still strong in him. How purified of all fleshly lusts and earthly desires our holy man now appears is shown by his vehement polemic against Feuerbach's sensuousness. Bruno by no means attacks the highly restricted way in which Feuerbach recognizes sensuousness. He regards Feuerbach's unsuccessful attempt, since it is an attempt to escape ideology, as a sin. Of course, sensuousness is lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, and arrogance, horror and abomination, in the eyes of the Lord. Do you not know that to be fleshly minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace? For to be fleshly minded is hostility to criticism, and everything of the flesh is of this world. And do you not know that it is written, the works of the flesh are manifest, there are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, obscenity, idolatry, witchcraft, enmity, strife, envy, anger, quarrelsomeness, discord, sinful gangs, hatred, murder, drunkenness, gluttony, and the like. I prophesy to you, as I prophesied before, that those who do such works will not inherit the kingdom of criticism. But woe to them, for in their thirst for the lights, they are following the path of Cain, and are falling into the error of Balaam, and will perish in a rebellion like that of Korah. These lewd ones feast shamelessly on your alms, and fatten themselves. There are clouds without water, driven by the wind, barren trees, twice dead and uprooted, wild ocean waves, frothing their own shame, errant stars condemned to the gloom of darkness forever. For we have read that in the last days there will be terrible times. People will appear who think much of themselves, lewd vilifiers who love voluptuousness more than criticism. The cites here 2 Timothy 3, 1-4. More than criticism, makers of sinful gains, in short, slaves of the flesh. Such people are shunned by St. Bruno, who is spiritually minded and loathes the stained covering of the flesh. And for this reason, he condemns Feuerbach, whom he regards as the Korah of the gang, to remain outside together with the dogs, the magicians, the debauch, and the assassins. Sensuousness, ugh. Not only does it throw the saintly church father into the most violent convulsions, but it even makes him sing. And on page 121, he chants, quote, "Song of the end and end of the song," end quote. Sensuousness. Do you know, unfortunate one, what sensuousness is? Sensuousness is, quote, a quote, stick. Seized with convulsions, St. Bruno even wrestles on one occasion with one of his own theses, just as Jacob of blessed memory wrestled with God, with the one difference that God twisted Jacob's thigh, while our saintly epileptic twists all the limbs and ties of his own theses, and so, by a number of striking examples, makes clear the identity of subject and object. Quote, Feuerbach may like what he... this is back to St. Bruno. Quote, Feuerbach may say what he likes. All the same, he destroys man, for he transforms the word man into a mere phrase. For he does not wholly make and create man, but raises the whole of mankind to the absolute, for in addition, he declares not mankind, but rather the senses to be the organ of the absolute, and stants to sensuousness. The object of the senses, a perception of sensation, as the absolute, indubitable, and the immediately certain, whereby Feuerbach, such as St. Bruno's opinion, can undoubtedly shake layers of the air, but he cannot smash the phenomena of human essence, because his innermost essence and his vitalizing spirit already destroys the external sound and makes it empty and jarring. This is back to Marx. St. Bruno himself gives us mysterious but decisive disclosures about the causes of his nonsensical attitude. Quote, as though my ego does not also possess just this particular sex unique compared with all others, and these particular unique sex organs. So Marx says here in parentheses, besides his quote unique sex organs, end quote, this noble-minded man also possesses a special quote unique sex, end quote. This unique sex is explained on page 121 in the sense that, quote, sensuousness, like a vampire, sucks all the marrow and blood from the life of man. It is the insurmountable barrier against which man has to deal himself a mortal blow, end quote. But even the saintliest man is not pure. They are all sinners and lack the glory that they should have before quote-unquote self-consciousness. St. Bruno, who in his lonely cell at midnight struggles with, quote, substance, end quote, has his attention drawn by the frivolous writings of the heretic Feuerbach to women and female beauty. Suddenly his sight becomes less keen. His pure self-consciousness is besmirched, and a reprehensible sensuous fantasy plays about the frightened critic with his lascivious images. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Bruno stumbles, he falls, he forgets that he is the power that, quote, with its strength binds, frees, and dominates the world, end quote. He forgets that these products of his imagination are, quote, spirit of his spirit, end quote. He loses all self-control and, intoxicated, stammers a dithyramb to female beauty, to its tenderness, softness, womanliness, to the full and rounded limbs, in the surging, undulating, seething, rushing, and hissing, wave-like structure of the body of woman. Innocence, however, always reveals itself, even where it sins. Who does not know what a surging, undulating, wave-like structure of the body is? Something that no eye has ever seen or ear heard. Therefore, hush, sweet soul, the spirit will soon prevail over the rebellious flesh and set an insurmountable barrier to the overflowing, seething lust, against which they will soon deal themselves a mortal blow. Quote, Feuerbach, the saint finally arrives at this through a critical understanding of the Heilige Familie. Quote, is a materialist tempered with and corrupted by humanism, i.e. a materialist who is unable to endure the earth and its being. End quote. St. Bruno knows the being of the earth as distinct from the earth itself, and knows how one should behave in order to endure the being of the earth, end quote. Quote, but wants the spiritualism himself and rise into heaven. And at the same time, he is a humanist who cannot think and build a spiritual world, but one who is impregnated with materialism, end quote, and so on. Just as for St. Bruno, humanism, according to this, consists in thinking and in building a spiritual world. So materialism consists in the following. The materialist recognizes only the existing actual being matter, as though man, with all his attributes, including thought, were not an existing actual being, and recognizes it as actively extending and realizing itself in multiplicity, nature. End quote. First, matter is an existing actual being, but only in itself, concealed. Only when it actively extends and realizes itself in multiplicity, an existing actual being realizes itself. Only then does it become nature. First, there exists the concept of matter, an abstraction, an idea, and this latter realizes itself in actual nature. Word for word, the Hegelian theory of the pre-existence of the creative categories. From this point of view, it is understandable that St. Bruno mistakes the philosophical phrases of the materialists concerning matter for the actual kernel and content of their world outlook. Okay, yeah, so that was a very active reading there. That was St. Bruno, section 2 of chapter 2 of the German ideology, and this was subsection, the quote, campaign, end quote, against Feuerbach. So then next we're going to read St. Bruno's views on the struggle between Feuerbach and Stirner. It's going to be a shorter one. Yeah, there's going to be some few more in here. And so, yeah, well, thank y'all for tuning in. You know, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, Medium, all these are Marxists, so y'all can hit me up there. Y'all have a great day, and Dodata Goi.